Hello, listeners! Welcome to Stars of the Golden Age, a show that highlights the lives of legends from film, music, and the birth of television during Hollywood's golden age and the few years surrounding it. I am your host, Erin Carlson. I had a request from one of my most supportive listeners a while back, so today I will be honoring that request. Thank you for all of your support, Ellen. This one is for you. Today, we will be talking about Evelyn Keyes, best known for her role in the most sought-after movie of the 1930s for those in the film industry. Know the movie? You'll figure it out soon enough. Evelyn Louise Keyes was born on November 20th, 1916 in Port Arthur, Texas, on the Gulf of Mexico. Her parents were Omar and Maud, solid names, and they had a total of 5 children, Evelyn being the youngest. She had 3 older sisters and 1 older brother, poor guy. Omar Keyes died when Evelyn was only 2 years old. She wasn't told much about his passing throughout her childhood, just that he was gone. Today, the loss of a parent at such a pivotal young age of development would be handled very delicately to support a child through the understanding of such a loss. But not so much in 1918, which left Evelyn with deep emotional scars and would forever alter her as a person. As an early childhood educator, I cannot stress enough the impact early experiences have on us as people. The neural connections in our brain are literally forming in the first 5 years of our lives, and at a super insane rate. And how those connections in our brains are made are dependent on the interactions and experiences that we endure. Every single one of them. So what children experience mold them as people. It's pretty incredible, and it can be pretty scary as well. And then you add things like the time Evelyn was sexually assaulted by her older brother's friend, and that really is not helping things. She was 5 years old, and her abuser was 15. And in those days, you usually didn't tell a soul if something like that happened to you. Okay, off of my nerdy brain development soapbox. So, needing help supporting the children, Maud moved the family to Atlanta and moved in with her mother. So Evelyn grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, a deeply segregated and deeply racist place. But she grew up thinking that that was just how life was, and there was nothing alarming about it. It's not her fault at all, that's just how it was then. She, of course, realized later in life that it was very wrong, but as a child, it was normal life in the South in her mind. It also wasn't seem as odd that Evelyn would do dance performances for the Daughters of the Confederacy. But these performances made her a little money, and she started saving that money to make her escape from Atlanta. Where was she going to escape to? Well, she wasn't quite sure, but she knew she did not want the same fate as her older sisters. As soon as they were old enough to work, they were sent out to make money and then dutifully bring every dime home to their mother and grandmother. Evelyn saw that they worked really hard, made some money, but still were not allowed to have any kind of social life or have any fun, and that would not do for her. Their childhoods were pretty strict. I assume it was very difficult for Maud, and the family no doubt needed the extra money that the children were able to provide once they hit working age. But it was still a dim, strict existence. Happiness really wasn't allowed. In fact, it was punishable. So Evelyn began taking an escape from this existence in books. Because in a book, you can get lost in remarkable worlds. And when you turn the last page of that world, you can open and enter into a new world. She loved this escape that books provided for her. And then, when she was 13 years old, it hit her. She knew what her future was to be. She would be an actress. Because actresses can be someone new with every single performance they do. And being the youngest of 5 for the struggling and grieving Maud, it didn't take much convincing for her to allow Evelyn to go to Hollywood. Evelyn Keyes arrived in the grand land of dreams in 1937. There's some conflicting information about this because she said many times that she was 17 when she arrived in Hollywood, but she would have been 20 or 21 in 1937. Either way, she moved into the Hollywood Studio Club, which was a dormitory for young women to reside in while they tried to make their way into fame and fortune in Hollywood. When Evelyn Keyes moved into the Hollywood Studio Club, the rent was about $10 per week for room and board, and I believe meals as well. I have this on my list for future bonus episodes, so I will for sure let you know when that happens. A lot of stars started out at the Hollywood Studio Club. Shortly after her arrival in Hollywood, Evelyn stepped into the office of Cecil B. DeMille at Paramount Studios. He liked her enough and signed her to a 7-year contract, which started at a measly $50 per week, which would adjust to about $1,100 per week today. She recalled in an interview that her contract had to be court-ordered since she was still underage, so another point for her being on the younger side. Cecil B. DeMille decided Evelyn Keyes was going to be his new protege, his pet project, his big success. He hadn't signed an actress to a long-term contract in 10 years, and he was taking the chance with Evelyn Keyes. It was very overwhelming for Evelyn. Being in a studio surrounded by hundreds of people and all kinds of bright lights for the first time was stressful enough. And then to add that extra pressure of being the perfect specimen for Cecil B. DeMille was enough to put her over the edge. And he had a temper, a scary temper. Everyone on the Paramount lot knew to do exactly what they were told, or they would have to endure the wrath of DeMille. And it wasn't pleasant. The studio got to work right away in transforming the young, innocent Evelyn Keyes into the woman they wanted for their films. She began acting lessons. She had never acted a second before arriving in Hollywood. Some dance lessons to improve her skill, and voice lessons to kill off that Southern accent. What would she ever need that for? Evelyn's first ever film role was a supporting character in 1938's The Buccaneer, starring Frederick March. It was stressful. She had so much to learn. The intensity of filming brought her to tears several times, as did the brash sexual advances from the men working on the film. It was an incredible cultural shift for the quiet Southern belle who had only ever known proper societal behavior. The premiere of The Buccaneer in New Orleans offered many firsts for Evelyn. Her first airplane ride, her first crowd applause, her first time eating oysters Rockefeller and shrimp jambalaya, and her first gay bar. She didn't know how to order from room service or how to tip waitstaff, so she didn't eat unless someone brought her out for a meal. She was very naive to this world, to anything outside of her home or the stories that she'd read in books. I cannot imagine the emotional strain that must have caused. She had put herself through so much cultural change. That's pretty brave, I think. Evelyn also met a dashing man shortly after her Hollywood adventure began. His name was Barton Bainbridge. He was 10 years older than her at 27. He had blonde hair and blue eyes. He was sophisticated, and he had an English accent. And Evelyn had a big thing for fancy names and fancy accents. But Barton wasn't a very supportive partner. He urged Evelyn into drinking and sex, neither of which she really wanted to do. Alcohol was an evil sin in her home growing up, so she never had any intention of drinking it. But Barton made it look cool and sophisticated, so she drank to please him. And she had sex with him to please him too. When she expressed her concerns about getting pregnant, he told her she didn't have to worry because he, quote, had his tubes tied. Barton, according to Evelyn, quote, didn't think much of queers, labor unions, income tax, Jews, radicals, and dark-skinned people, end quote. At 27 years old, he had an ex-wife and 3 children already in his past. Barton had a small apartment in the Hollywood Hills, and Evelyn would sleep over every now and then. This is a really sad quote from Evelyn's book. Quote, once the push-push wham-bam stuff was over, the sleeping part was nice. I was still missing the body warmth of my mother, with whom I had slept until I had left home, end quote. The poor girl was just looking for human contact and companionship. Even so, she continued a relationship with Barton. He despised anything motion picture related, so she kind of enjoyed having a companion set apart from her life on the Paramount lot. But then she began experiencing all of the signs of early pregnancy. Barton took her to his doctor, the doctor who had performed his vasectomy, and both men chastised Evelyn for her pregnancy and insisted if she was pregnant, there is absolutely no way it could be Barton's. Even though she wasn't active with anyone else but Barton, who had told her that he was sterile, this situation was deemed to be her fault. So during the exam, without her consent or with any warning, the doctor took care of the situation, violently. And when she screamed in pain, he quickly jabbed a needle in her arm and she lost consciousness. This is the horrifying truth of our past, but it gets much worse for Evelyn, because she almost died. A few days after the botched abortion, she became very, very sick and was in incredible pain. And then the dam of blood and womb burst. She lost a lot of blood. And then she lost consciousness. And then she lost her pulse. Barton rushed her to the nearest hospital where she was barely saved. She had to tell Cecil B. DeMille that she had suffered an appendicitis. She recovered from near death in complete silence, and all alone. Barton promptly left for Florida, leaving her all alone with his cat, who promptly gave birth to a litter of kittens. Evelyn's body, at least the physical part of it, healed just in time for Cecil B. DeMille's next obligation for her. But it wasn't an obligation to Paramount. DeMille told her he was sending her over to Selznick International Studio to do a screen test. Not just any screen test, a screen test for the biggest movie of the year, of the decade, Gone with the Wind. Evelyn had read the book Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell. Everyone had read the book. And now everyone wanted to be in the film. According to Evelyn, in an interview I watched of her, she had no idea what she was doing when she was cast for the role of Sue Ellen in Gone with the Wind. It was only the second film she'd ever been in. It could have been her third, but that near-death experience pushed her out of the movie that she had been filming. It's really important to understand that everyone, and I mean everyone, was begging for a part in this movie. It was the most sought-after film. It was a huge, huge deal. And Evelyn didn't try at all to get into the action. She was just sent there. A girl with very, very little experience. Why? Well, because she had grown up in Atlanta, Georgia, of course, where Gone with the Wind takes place. When Cecil B. DeMille sent Evelyn Keyes off to her screen test at Selznick International, he told her she better get that part or he was going to shoot her at dawn. And she took him pretty seriously. Thankfully, she got the part and her life was saved once again. The funny thing about this is, remember, Cecil B. DeMille's first order of business in his transformation of Evelyn was getting rid of her Southern Georgia accent. Now she was appearing in Gone with the Wind as a Southern belle. She had to be retaught that Southern accent that she worked so hard to get rid of. The filming of Gone with the Wind was an epic venture, and it of course turned out to be an epic film. One of the very best ever made. I know I've said it before, but I was forced to watch Gone with the Wind many, many times as a child. My dad was a huge Civil War buff. It was slightly dreadful for me as a kid. I mean, the movie is 4 hours long. But as an adult, I love it so, so, so much. And I had the great honor of being able to see it on the big screen with my dear friend Amanda a couple of years ago. Hi, Amanda. No matter how many times I see Gone with the Wind, it still leaves me speechless. It just affects you deep in your soul, don't you think? It was just so well done. And Evelyn Keyes got to be a part of that. She had barely acted at all, and suddenly she was working alongside Clark Gable, Leslie Howard, and Olivia de Havilland, and the great Hattie McDaniel, of course. She was working with Vivien Leigh, who was new to the US, but obviously an amazingly talented actress, and so stunningly beautiful. Part of the reason Evelyn was cast in the role of Sue Ellen was because she looked like she could be Vivien Leigh's sister. That alone is a great honor. Filming of Gone with the Wind was grueling, and the filming event that was supposed to be a grand deal for her career at Paramount was just the opposite. Cecil B. DeMille opted out of her contract on August 31st, 1939. You see, 7-year contract or not, he had the power to do that. She did not. His reason was her illness. It had put her too far behind in her filming obligations. The pregnancy she didn't ask for, that was caused by the sex she didn't want, and resulted in the traumatic abortion against her will that almost killed her, also killed her contract with Paramount Studios. The very next day, Hitler invaded Poland. With the almost certain destiny that the U.S. would join World War II, Evelyn suggested to Barton, out of love and sacrifice, that he remarry his ex-wife, because if he were married with 3 children, his chances of being drafted would be minimized. He reacted out of anger, suggesting that she was just trying to get rid of him, that she should marry him instead. She didn't want to, but she did. One down, a few to go, she later said. The marriage wasn't happy. Evelyn loathed sexual intimacy with her new husband. He didn't try to engage with her when he was drunk, so she encouraged him to drink all the time. She begged him to keep their marriage a secret until she made it big in the film business, because marriage could ruin a film career. The secret newlywed flew to Atlanta in December of 1939 for the biggest movie premiere in history. Atlanta was a city of 300,000 residents, and an additional 1 million people flocked into town for the grand event. Quoting from Evelyn Keyes' autobiography, quote, "All of Atlanta was taken over. Confederate flags flew everywhere. Store windows were filled with Gone with the Wind displays in Confederate colors. Scarlett and Rhett dolls and candies were on sale. The theater front was made to look like Tara. We were paraded through town in open cars, one for each of us. Clark Gable, the last in line, having arrived in a separate plane with Gone with the Wind emblazoned across the side. Women screamed and fainted at the sight of him. The streets from the suburbs all along the length of Peachtree Street were packed solid with humanity, many of them in their ancestral Civil War uniforms or hoop skirts and pantaloons. Bands played Dixie every few yards, rebel yells filled the air, confetti floated from the rooftops and windows like snow." End quote. And having been 74 years since the end of the Civil War, there were even a few very old men in their Confederate uniforms who had fought in the deadly war when they were just kids. Evelyn and the rest of the cast were put up in a luxurious hotel and dined on the most elegant of foods. Well, everyone except for Hattie McDaniel, Butterfly McQueen, and the other Black cast members. They weren't there. Not because they had other obligations. They weren't allowed to be there. The city of Atlanta had banned them. Gone with the Wind was the talk of the town and a gigantic success. But Evelyn Keyes was still without a job and a paycheck now that filming was over. As she searched for her next gig, she found luck with Harry Cohn at Columbia Pictures, who signed her to a 7-year contract, again with that yearly option to drop her if he decided that she wasn't doing him any good. Evelyn was happy and optimistic. Well, about her career at least. On a personal front, not so much. She had made a terrible, terrible mistake in marrying Barton. His drinking was getting out of control. Yes, it prevented him from wanting to be intimate with her, but he was becoming vulgar and verbally abusive. And then when a late-night argument ended in her threatening to move into the Hollywood Studio Club and him storming out to the bar, it turned really ugly when she was awoken at 3 a.m. with a gun pressed to her temple. At the other end of it was Barton threatening to kill her. The gun stayed pressed against Evelyn's temple for a long, terrifying 30 minutes. Finally, Barton cried, I can't do it," dropped the gun, and passed out. Evelyn moved back into the Hollywood Studio Club the next morning while her husband was still passed out, with the gun still next to him. Barton was full of regret and threatened to end his life if Evelyn didn't return to him. But she wasn't budging. She was done. She would remain legally married to him to lower his odds of having to go to war, but her relationship with Barton Bainbridge was over. Evelyn quietly moved into a small apartment in the Hollywood Hills underneath the Hollywoodland sign that had welcomed her into this life. She had gotten off the train in California with such big dreams, and the life she'd had so far in the very short time she'd been in Hollywood was beyond her wildest dreams, in both good ways and bad. With Barton in her past, Evelyn began a new romance with the director of her next film, Charles Vidor. He was handsome, flirtatious, confident but considerate, and Hungarian, which meant he had an irresistible accent. And he was finally able to show her that sex was something that maybe even a woman could enjoy. After their first time together, when she expressed she had no idea it could be that enjoyable, Charles replied, "Of course not. You have never known a Hungarian before." Evelyn Keyes was under a spell with Charles Vidor for the next 4 years. While she was in the beginning euphoria of her relationship with Charles, she received a call from her still husband Barton on the afternoon of July 19, 1940. He said he was leaving for South America that night and asked if he could stop by and tell her goodbye in person. She didn't really want to see him, but she agreed to accept his visit. Barton showed up to Evelyn's apartment in a neatly pressed suit to say goodbye. He said he would be gone for a very long time, and he asked her if she would like to have his blue Packard convertible since he would no longer need it. Evelyn was ecstatic at his generosity, especially after all they'd been through. He would take her old car and leave her with his shiny blue beauty. Before leaving, he asked if he could give her a kiss goodbye. She allowed him to. And then he said to her, "I will think of you, Evelyn, as long as I live." He lived for just a few more hours. That evening, Evelyn received a call from the police that her car was found on Ventura Boulevard in the San Fernando Valley with her husband inside of it, with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head and a note stating he had done it because she had left him. "I never left a man again," Evelyn wrote. "I made them leave me instead." Barton Bainbridge was only 32 years old when he ended his life. Evelyn Keyes said something in her autobiography that really resonated with me, and I think it will likely resonate with anyone who has lost someone of great importance to them in a sudden way, or in any way at all. She said, quote, "Burton's act of death and nature's glorious demonstrations of life were forever locked together in my mind. On the way to his funeral, I looked out at the tall palms swaying majestically against a blue California sky. I looked at the myriads of blooming flowers along the way, the green grass, dogs, moving cars with people in them, laughing, animated. And I thought, I will never see these things in the same way again." End quote. I read this passage a few times because I sadly know exactly what she meant. I know that feeling, and I know many of you do too. When we endure this kind of loss, not just by suicide, any intense loss, life is never the same. And it is truly the oddest feeling in the world to float along in your haze of debilitating grief to see people going about their daily routines as if the world just hasn't been shattered into a million tiny pieces. And laughing, seeing people laughing is the hardest. How can anyone be laughing? It's that incredibly heart-wrenching realization that the world goes on undisturbed for everyone within it while you are suffering an internal pain that nobody can see. And after a short time, nobody will even care. And your life would never, ever be the same. Life as you knew it was over, and you would rebuild a new life as a completely changed person. Evelyn Keyes was only 23 years old when she was forced to experience this thing that we all go through at some point, but for the luckiest of them, it isn't until much later in life. At 23 years old, Evelyn had lost a father she never even knew she knew. She was molested by a teenager at 5 years old. She was treated like a slab of meat at a meat market in countless studio offices. She was literally chased around those offices by dirty old men. She was denied parts for not sleeping her way into them. She starred in one of the most iconic movies of all time, still to this day. She almost died twice in terrifyingly brutal ways, and now she was left with the forever guilt of causing the death of her estranged husband. The man who had almost killed her with a gunshot to the head had done just that to himself. At 23 years old, this is what she had endured. Barton Bainbridge was very clearly suffering from some kind of mental illness. He attempted to self-medicate through alcohol, but we all know how that works out. He needed help. Today, he could get the help that he needed. But instead, his story ended with such tragedy, forever altering the lives of everyone who loved him, and leaving Evelyn to bear the weight of the responsibility of it all. She replaced the apartment and the Packard convertible so she wouldn't have those daily reminders of that horrible day. As for her relationship with Charles Vidor, they remained together, but he was less than supportive of the emotional turmoil that she was going through. This would be her fight to fight alone. Evelyn was now a widow, and Charles was soon to be finally divorced from his estranged second wife. 3.5 years after Barton's death, 27-year-old Evelyn Keyes became wife number 3 to 44-year-old Charles Vidor in late February of 1944. Charles was having affairs immediately. Well, he probably already was before they got married. I mean, Evelyn was an affair. She learned a hard lesson the day she discovered that she was no different than any of the others to a lying, cheating man. The marriage was over within a year, but not before Charles threatened to kill Evelyn and then himself if she didn't take him back. "You destroy men," he said as he threatened her. Wow, low blow. Evelyn Keyes learned to never, ever trust another soul again. Nobody could be trusted, she thought. Isn't this so sad? This truly was not the life that she expected when she headed to Hollywood. Evelyn tried to rebuild her life again. Columbia head Harry Cohn had become her protector, and she began dating and hitting up all of the hot clubs, like Ciro's and the Macombo. She was on the arm of men like Robert Stack and Peter Lawford. She was having fun. But Harry Cohn wasn't just trying to protect her. He was trying to own her and control her. And when she refused to give in to his sexual demands, he promised to end her career. A tale as old as Hollywood time. She was able to stay at Columbia, but Harry Cohn kept his word. He wasn't allowing any great parts to go to Evelyn. But she was free to live her life, which really she hadn't been able to do since her arrival in Hollywood 7 years prior. And she had fun. She was really in the great circles of Hollywood society by now. And then she met John Huston at a party, and all bets were off. He was better than the last two, she thought. He had to be. But he wasn't really. The two eloped on a whim on July 23rd, 1946, just a few weeks after they had met, and they both immediately regretted it. But they hung on anyways. John continued to live like a bachelor, and Evelyn did her best to accept this as life. She lived on a beautiful ranch. She was socializing in amazing circles, Bogey and Bacall being the closest. She tried to look past the other women John kept company with. He wasn't even trying to hide them either. And then he surprised her by adopting a homeless 13-year-old Mexican boy, and he became attached at the hip with Evelyn. He must have been so overwhelmed. A new country, a new language to learn, finally some parents, wealth instead of poverty, huge cultural change. He had a lot to overcome, and Evelyn was the person he felt comfortable with as he navigated through his emotional transition. Part of this transition and emotional navigation included the boy making sexual advances at Evelyn. Again, a situation that would be handled so differently today, but back then, avoidance was the best answer. And then along came the Red Scare. The House Un-American Acts Committee was really sniffing hard around Hollywood, looking for anyone who even thought about communism. Even if they simply guessed a person to be a communist sympathizer, out you go. Well, John Huston and a few others weren't going to just stand back and let the government ruin lives like this. They formed the Committee for the First Amendment, and they were soon joined by other powerful Hollywood personalities. Katharine Hepburn, Grace Kelly, Burt Lancaster, Donnie Kaye, Lucille Ball, Gregory Peck, Humphrey Bogart, and Lauren Bacall, and about 500 more. And many of them went all the way to Washington, D.C. to stand up for American rights and freedoms. But they were no match for the United States government. After their trip to D.C., the Committee for the First Amendment was now listed as a Communist Front organization. So because they fought against the government's mission to rid the U.S. of communists, for freedom's sake and nothing else, they themselves were considered communists. John and Evelyn continued to stray apart, eventually leading to her moving out. But when a barely legal young adult woman took her place in the ranch house, it was time to call the marriage quits. They divorced in February of 1950, and by the end of that year, John would be remarried and have a child. His second child, Angelica Huston, was born the following year. And now something very unusual happened. John had his new wife and new children, and he was running around on this wife as well, with Evelyn and others. So she suddenly shifted from the wife to the mistress. John and Evelyn would always remain friends, sometimes more intimately than other times. Evelyn's next boyfriend was Kirk Douglas. The romance didn't last incredibly long, but it was an important one because he helped her make 2 decisions that would alter the rest of her life. He convinced her to see a therapist, and he convinced her to leave Columbia Pictures and the control of Harry Cohn. Time for yet another new chapter in the life of Evelyn Keyes. And boy, did she make this chapter an intriguing one. Against the advice of her therapist, she began hopping all over the world. Mexico, Argentina, Morocco, London, Paris, Venice. And with each place she arrived, thinking that place could be her new home. But then something would urge her to go on to the next place, and the next. Her therapist had told her she was running from her life and she needed to stop running and face her truths. But she thought this was just ridiculous. She did work during this world tour of life too. She did a movie in Mexico, one in Paris, and another in London. And then she started dating Mike Todd. And whoa, was that a roller coaster. From the get-go, Evelyn thought Mike was a little over the top. But that over-the-topness grew on her and quickly became attractive to her. His confidence, his energy, his charisma, he wasn't afraid of anything. It was good and exciting for the most part. But then, Evelyn let it slip that she had slept with a black man at one point. No big deal, or so that's what we all think, right? Well, Mike Todd thought otherwise. He was disgusted, and he wouldn't drop it. He brought it up any chance he could, and it led to many, many, many heated fights. Many silent treatments, many semi-breakups. It was ridiculous. He just wouldn't let it go. They were going to get married, but this kept breaking them up. Evelyn summed up Mike Todd like this, quote, "A person like that, great to visit, but hard to live with, like being in a perpetual whirlwind. It was impossible to separate truth from fantasy, fact from fiction, and perhaps there was no difference," end quote. Every time they tried to end their toxic relationship, that whole absence makes the heart grow fonder business tricked them back into each other's arms. Until the next big blowout fight right around the corner. And they did that on repeat for 4 years. And just when it was all breaking apart again for the umpteenth time, Mike Todd presented Evelyn Keyes with a beautiful 5-carat engagement ring. They were going to make this thing work out. I'm not really sure why they thought a ring would miraculously make things better, but that's what they thought. And then Elizabeth Taylor and her husband, Michael Wilding, appeared at one of their events. And then another. As many of you know, Elizabeth Taylor had 7 husbands. Michael Wilding was the 2nd. And spoiler alert, Mike Todd was the 3rd. Evelyn finally had hope for her roller coaster relationship. That maybe that roller coaster was about to smooth out into a nice, long, peaceful country lane. But then came a bombshell out of nowhere. Her fiancé, Mike Todd, announced that he was in love with Elizabeth Taylor. It was really over this time. Evelyn returned to Paris. When she didn't know what to do or where to go, Paris was where she fell. It was her comfort zone. She was devastated at the loss of yet another serious relationship. It had to be her, she thought. She was damaged. But then a friend introduced her to the famous clarinetist and bandleader Artie Shaw. And from the very moment they met, they became inseparable. Artie Shaw had been insanely famous, but he was one of those celebrities whose life was changed overnight by the Un-American Activities Committee for his alleged ties to communism. Not to mention the heavy debt that he owed to the IRS, too. So he had said goodbye to the United States and started anew in Europe. Evelyn said this of her early relationship with Artie Shaw, quote, "The dialogue begun between us would spin out unceasingly throughout the years. The searching, the delving, looking into each other's corners and crevices, wanting to know the hows, the whys, wanting to understand each other. We must learn everything about each other, leave no stone unturned. Perfect and total communication was our goal. This was the way to avoid the mistakes of the past, the way to benefit from our errors in order to make this the most perfect relationship of all time," end quote. They had hope. I mean, it's easy to get swept away like this in the beginning, right? before reality sets in. Now, I don't know about you, but this would be a huge red flag for me. Artie Shaw had been married 7 times, a couple of those ex-wives including Ava Gardner and Lana Turner. But Evelyn figured she wasn't exactly perfect herself in the love department, so the 7 previous marriages didn't really faze her much. So, Artie and Evelyn got married in Gibraltar sometime in 1957. Artie Shaw was the 4th marriage for Evelyn. They built a stunning home in Spain right on the Mediterranean Sea. If nothing else, the home made Evelyn very happy. Both Ava Gardner and Lana Turner said their marriages to Artie Shaw were difficult because he was extremely emotionally abusive. And after reading Evelyn Keyes' account of her relationship with him, I would sure say that's true. He called himself the captain of their relationship, meaning he would be the boss and make all of the rules and all of the decisions. He told her exactly how to act and what she should and shouldn't do to be a proper wife. He told her that her sloppiness and inability to be a dutiful housewife is what drove all of the other men away and was the cause of any issues in their relationship. It was all her. And that the reason she didn't know how to be a proper housewife was because her father had died and left her without a man to show her. He said her place was in the home and that the home should be perfect at all times. They had a small staff, but Evelyn would need to oversee their work and make sure they were doing everything right and that everything was always perfect. And Artie Shaw was very OCD. Evelyn recounted in her book that Artie said since she had to do all of these housewife duties for him, why not do them the right way? Quote, his morning eggs to the exact degree of hard or softness, the freshly squeezed orange juice without any seeds or pulp, toast buttered to the edge and not a fraction less, and coffee poured to the exact 1/4 inch below the rim, no more, no less. It was nerve-wracking, the constant surveillance of these minute measurements that extended to all foods, to all parts of the house, inside and out, end quote. Poor Evelyn was so happy to have love again that she fell right into his words and obeyed his every order. At first. He was constantly putting her down, but he did so in the most masterfully manipulative way. She was his little puppet. He got deep into her mind and convinced her that this was how life was supposed to be, that she was damaged and he loved her enough to fix her. He had specific rules for his food, his laundry, his belongings, every single aspect of his life. A very detailed handbook to follow. She mentioned his ashtray a few times in the book. His ashtray needed to be in the precisely exact location on the table to his liking. One time he blew up because it was in the correct location, but it wasn't the ashtray that he liked. I would not have made it as a wife of Artie Shaw. Butter your own toast, dude. And he told Evelyn a completely made-up fact that most marriages ended in the time frame when the women had their periods. That women are crazy and irrational and simply cannot be handled at all when they have their period. So he gave Evelyn a period persona, a new name for when she had her period, Myrtle, and made her tell him when her period was coming so he could avoid her and save their marriage. It just couldn't be his incredibly unrealistic expectations of his wives and constant gaslighting. It was the menstruation that caused his 7 divorces. Yikes. Evelyn received shocking news on March 22, 1958. Mike Todd had been killed in a plane crash. Evelyn and Mike had such an intense relationship, and she had loved him so deeply. This was incredibly heartbreaking for her. Artie made all of the rules in their lives, and in 1960, he decided they were moving back to the U.S. Evelyn didn't want to leave the sea, but it didn't matter what Evelyn wanted. So back to the U.S. they went. And then, 6 years into their marriage, Artie announced to Evelyn that he was going to start having an affair. She was actually okay with that. It would get him off her back for a while. But then it turned into a full-blown relationship, and Evelyn realized that she was being replaced completely. Well, not completely. She still had to make sure their home was in pristine working order and that Artie was completely waited on at all times. That was her duty as his wife. The young mistress would take care of all the fun stuff. Evelyn began seeing a therapist again. He said to her that he had never given this advice to anyone in his entire career, but she had to leave her husband. He was too destructive. She needed to get out. But remember what Evelyn said after her first husband's suicide. She would never again leave a man. She would make them leave her. From 1962 on, Artie Shaw lived his own life completely apart from his wife. He started a new life with his new girlfriend, a new woman to train in. According to an interview I read that Artie Shaw had given to the New York Times in 1973, he said that both he and Evelyn just decided in 1962 that they would live in an open marriage and that they officially separated in 1970. But according to Evelyn's very intimate memoir, that's not exactly how it played out. Evelyn Keyes remained legally married to Artie Shaw until 1985. The marriage long over, the two were finally officially divorced, and Evelyn received almost half of Artie's estate in the settlement. Good for her. It sounds like she really deserved it. In terms of her relationships, Evelyn reflected on always searching for the father she lost, the father she didn't even have memories of. She was seeking that fatherly guidance, and she found it in the men she married. She was drawn to directors because they could direct her. And then, as she said herself, she worked her way up to the leader of the band, Artie Shaw. Even the studio itself, she said, the studio takes care of its people, and that's what she was seeking. Evelyn's memoir ends with an unexpected new chapter in her life. She was offered a starring role in the 1970 revival of the musical No No Nanette on Broadway. And while performing one evening, she realized she was happy. This was all she ever wanted, and here she was in her mid-50s doing it. She had gotten lost along the way, really lost, several times. She got lost in the idea that she had to give herself to others, that she had to allow others to mold her, that she was broken, that her dreams were not a priority. She got lost searching for a mirage of happiness, only to be disappointed each time. It took her a while, but she realized that she didn't need another person to complete her happiness. All she needed was herself. It was there all along. Evelyn Keyes died from uterine cancer on July 4th, 2008. She was 91 years old. And now I would like to share some other interesting things I learned during my research. Bullet point number 1. Evelyn Keyes said in an interview I watched that she did not want the title of her book to be Scarlett O'Hara's younger sister. She wanted the title to be A Good Man is Hard to Find. Bullet point number 2. Aside from her amazing autobiography, Evelyn Keyes also wrote a novel. She wrote it in 1971, about 5 years before her tell-all memoir. It's titled I Am a Billboard and is about a Southern girl who becomes a Hollywood star and the life that comes along with it. Sound familiar? I'll be reading that one for sure. Bullet point number 3. Evelyn was named as the Max Factor Star of the Year in 1943, and in 1947, she was listed as one of the #1 stars of tomorrow by the U.S. movie theater operators. Bullet point number 4. I know I barely talked about her career, but Evelyn did appear in over 40 movies and several television shows. She was with Mike Todd during his grand production of Around the World in 80 Days in 1956, which had a lot of big names appearing in it, including Evelyn's. She was also in The 7-Year Itch with Marilyn Monroe in 1955. She had a rich career, but her career definitely could have taken off in more of a movie star direction if Harry Cohn hadn't taken such control over her life after she refused his romantic and sexual advances. And there you have it. Now you know that Scarlett O'Hara's younger sister had a presence way greater than that. I didn't know. In fact, when I asked Ellen if she had any recommendations for me, and she said Evelyn Keyes, I replied to her, didn't she play Scarlett O'Hara's sister? So I was one of them. And I am so grateful I took this incredible journey into Miss Keyes' life. I couldn't put her book down. It is incredible. But when the time finally came when there were no more pages left to turn, I put it down with a feeling of sadness. I felt sad for her. I felt like she was cheated out of happiness and love and life. She traveled all over the world and did the things that most people can only dream of, but she did it with a half-empty heart. The things in life that are truly important, love, family, comfort, security, peace, happiness, she never really had those things. She had Paris and London and Argentina and Venice, But those were just landing pads as she either searched for or ran from that love and security and peace and happiness. I watched a few later in life interviews with Evelyn Keyes, and she seemed like such a wonderful, wonderful woman. She seemed like a person who I would love to sit down with and have a cup of tea and just listen to her speak. She was cool and candid, yet she had so much grace. I miss grace, don't you? Thank you, Evelyn Keyes, for sharing your incredible story with us. The things you endured in life are heartbreaking, but you came through it all learning the ultimate lesson. True happiness lies within us all. Thank you so much, Ellen, for this amazing recommendation. What a remarkable woman Evelyn Keyes was. And thank you so much for your support, Ellen. It means so much to me. And thank you all for listening. My primary source for this episode was a book titled Scarlett O'Hara's Younger Sister by Evelyn Keyes. I also used an interview of Evelyn Keyes with Tom Snyder on The Late Late Show from June 22, 1998. An interview with Merv Griffin from 1977, another television interview from October of 1978, a New York Times article from February 18, 1973, and IMDb.